Good evening. Today is Monday, June 18, 2022, and this is the 106th episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. In this special episode, the 106th episode, we have brought back a very special guest again, a close confidant for the Near East, and someone who Americans and our allies should pay very close attention to, Jennifer Zeng. Jennifer had recently been on the show where she uncovered the CCP discussing plans for open invasion against the democratic free nation of Taiwan on the heels of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. It seemed that the CCP is now again repeating his actions against the island nation while at the same time blaming Japan. With the assassination of the Prime Minister Abe recently, Jennifer is back here again to discuss what are the link analysis and the regional and global implications and effects of such actions. The last few weeks had been a very much of a whirlwind of revelations about the CCP and their intentions, both in Japan and outside, and also how those would be affecting multiple nations in Southeast Asia and particularly parts of Japan. It is very important for us to have the discussions based on what Jennifer has been able to uncover when it comes to the issues of what happened with the assassination of Prime Minister Abe. Jennifer, it's great to have you here again. I'm fortunate it's having you here on the heels of what just happened in Japan with the assassination of Prime Minister Abe. And the floor is yours. Whatever you can tell us about what you have been able to uncover, I think would give our listeners and viewers an ability to understand where CCP and the regional implications are today.
Okay, so first of all, I think since former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's death, I did uncovered a lot of information, but the latest one was a revelation by former law professor of Peking University, Yuan Hongbin, on this past Saturday. He did a YouTube show in Chinese language, and I virtually translated the whole of what he talked in that 11 minutes show into English. So I put all the transcript in English and in Chinese on my own website, and I also did a own show in English about, I think that's very important revelation regarding from the Mr. Abe's assassination. So the main points are Mr. Abe's assassination was actually conducted by CCP's secret member in Japan, and also and the two major reasons why the CCP would assassinate Mr. Abe was one, because Mr. Abe had not only put forward the strategic principle of a Taiwan emergency would be a Japan emergency, but he also strongly supported and actively promoted the formation of the Quad between the United States, Japan, India, and Australia to counter the CCP's strategy of, take Taiwan by force. And also another reason is Mr. Abe could effectively promote the enactment of a Japanese version of the Taiwan Relations Act. If that happens, that means I think that would be one of the biggest blow to the CCP. If that happens, the strategic principle that a Taiwan emergency is a Japan emergency can be put into concrete law form. So that, according to Professor Yuan, the two major reasons why the CCP would want to, assassinate Mr. Abe. And according to him, this disclosure was first revealed by Zeng Baobao, who is the niece of the former Chinese vice chairman Zeng Qinghong, or somebody also call him him vice president. He's actually the main, figure of the Jiang Zemin faction. Within CCP, there are several major factions. They fight with each other. So Jiang Zemin and Zheng Qinghong are together in this fraction, and I think that is the major fraction that is fighting against Xi Jinping. Jiang Zemin, of course, was the former head of the CCP. So according to Yuan Hongbin, the above information about CCP's secret member was assassinated by CCP secret member in Japan assassinated Mr. Abe. So this news this piece of information was released by Zheng Qinghong's niece, Zheng Baobao. And also, Mr. Yuan Hongbin gave some more detail and background explanation of this assassination. It was a so-called special task program initiated by the CCP's international department. Sometimes it is also translated as International Liaison Department. So that department was under the CCP's Central Commission's direct, guidance. Initially, its task was to develop or maintain relationships with other political parties of other countries. Many, there are a lot of communist parties in different countries, or workers' parties, or democratic socialist parties that can have or usually have a cooperation relationship with the CCP. But since Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, he actually asked to have two committees established inside this international department. One is International Committee, which is mainly develop secret CCP members in major countries such as Japan, Australia, India, Southeast countries. And another committee under international department is called Taiwan Committee. So now Xi Jinping's henchman Liu Jianchao is the head of the international department. His appointment was publicly announced in June this year, but he actually took charge in March. So according to some other sources inside the CCP, in March, Liu Jianchao made a long speech of 90 minutes, among which from 30 minutes of that speech, he read from a script. But there was also for the other 30 minutes, he talked off script, and no one is allowed to record or even take notes of what he said in that 30 minutes. So the main points, according to people who knew the content, maybe they didn't take notes, they remembered the main points. So the main points of his speech is that he emphasized the need to clearly establish and strengthen the sense of pre-war or close to war status. So he virtually said, now we are close to a war, or we are already in a war preparation or pre-war status. So all the officials of the international department should wake up to the fact that a battle to solve the Taiwan issue, mainly by means of military struggle, has already begun. So this is one of his main points. And then he said, the main responsibility of the International Committee and Taiwan Committee of the International Department is to develop secret members, like I said, in Taiwan, in Japan, in accordance like Xi Jinping especially set up two conditions to recruit CCP secret members in other countries. One is you have to, they use the word still-like conviction to keep party secrets, and still-like belief, which is very firm belief in communism. So that's their secret killer, force to carry out special task programs at specific points in time, thus as a complementing part of the military struggle. So at the same time, in his speech, Liu Jiantao also called stronger support for India Communist Party and its guerrilla force to weaken the capability of the Indian authorities in interfering if, like in the border areas when the CCP launches war in the Taiwan Strait. And also he called for the development of CCP secret members in Australia to effectively influence public opinion in Australia and undermine the effectiveness of the US, Japan, India, Australia Quad mechanism. So that's the basic information about, that's the source or his speech in this March secret speech comes from different another sources, and the CCP secret member in Japan carried out the assassination task comes from another source, which is Zheng Qinghong's niece, Zheng Baobao. So Yuan Hongbin said, if we put all the sources of different, information from different sources together. So overall, he said that according to the CCP's member inside the party who still have a conscience, who want to do something good, that he said actually CCP officials in Beijing, like all believe that Abe's death was carried out by the CCP's international department, and it could really happen that when Liu Jiantao took over the international department in March, and after he gave that speech, maybe he had already worked on carrying out the plan. So, and in his program, Professor Yuan Hongbin also revealed some very astonishing facts or information about what the CCP plan to do in Taiwan. So basically, they've already compiled a assassination list with 52 people's name on it, including Taiwan's Vice President William Lai, or his Chinese name is Lai Qingde, and 8 lawmakers and other people from all walks of life. And also, he said other resources in China told him the CCP had already developed nearly 200 CCP's secret agents in Taiwan. So when the mass assassination campaign were launched, so there could be 2 time points. One is before, around or during the 2024 Taiwan election. Another possibility is on the eve when the CCP decides to launch a war against Taiwan. So that is, I think, also very, very shocking. That's why I did an English program yesterday. I do hope that Taiwan government should pay, attention to this piece of information. Because if we look at the CCP's history, ever before it came into power, I think in the early days of its established in the 1930s, 40s, especially during the CCP's fight with the Kuomintang, that is the legitimate ruling party in China then. Assassination and spy activities were 2 main weapons or the secrets that the CCP adopted, and to the effect that it finally really defeated Kuomintang. So that is a tradition of the CCP assassination spy activities. So we should really not underestimate any of this, information, and because that's the tradition of the CCP. For anybody who is very familiar with CCP's history, I think they would not feel surprised at all if the CCP adopt the same tactics today in its fight against Taiwan and against Japan and in other countries. They think assassination is a very effective method to use, especially at some critical historic moment, and to target some very critical, important people. They think that can have very, very good result. One, they remove their most dangerous enemies. Two, they could create unexpected situation or maybe chaos in the society. So its enemy would be suddenly at a loss of what to do if some of the most important leaders or actual leaders or spiritual leaders got removed, and the country or that region could fall into chaos for a little while, so that the CCP could have a advantage to move forward to achieve its own agenda. So that's the main information in Professor Yuan Hongbin's video, which I think the whole world need to really pay attention to.
No, I hope they do, and that's a wonderful layout, to be honest, and for our intelligence folks who are listening to this program and look into what was out there. We're talking about open source information, a lot of it just being translated to make sure that the content is revealed. Imagine what is already known by the Japanese government as to what happened. And I think they're in a bad position right now, trying to figure out how to go ahead and relay that information slowly, possibly, to the Japanese people, given the fact also that the security procedures around Prime Minister Abe were just absolutely awful. So that was a failure in itself, and they have already stated that internally. But I will tell you, Jen, that I was standing actually in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I was there after the war, and I stood at the location where Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, and that's led to a major war that completely changed how the world, was constructed, and from its economy to its politics, to the fact that it laid the foundation for World War II. But with that said, given the fact that there was, as has been alleged and revealed, that the shooter was a communist, and he was tied to elements of the CCP that in the past had met with him. How do you think the Japanese government can go forward now, knowing the fact that they don't want to be baited into a war, but understanding that there's been war declared in the open against them, given the fact that they're also, as you said, a member of the Quad, and with Abe really wanting to ensure that Article 9 would have been addressed after this election. As you know, I was, the night before Abe's assassination, I was actually talking to Japanese leaders on a Zoom on the Article 9 issue, and their biggest problem was, how do we convince the current generation, the younger generation, that really has been influenced a lot by the Chinese Communist Party influencers within the country, just like the ones that we have here that are influenced, to be able to understand the importance of why Article 9 needs to be removed. And Abe was looking into the 21st century to be able to get where Japan can actually defend itself. Now, since his assassination, I know that his political party has garnered actually much more broader support, possibly putting him in a position of strength. And this was actually a flyer of the discussion that I was having the night before. Where do we go from here, Jennifer? How do you explain the possibility of a war while you're being handcuffed with Article 9 to the people of Japan. Is it that they have to head down this road, or is there means or ways that maybe with the international community we can counter the possibility of deterring China from taking the steps that they're trying to take, given the fact they're having a lot of economic issues, and the fact that Xi may have to take these steps just to be able to solidify his position in China?
Yes, I think it is very important we recognize or we admit the danger of the CCP and what it is planned to do. I think there are so many different indications in recent years that the CCP is seriously preparing for a war against Taiwan. I think many people already got that point. So I think the next stage is just to make our own political decision and whether and also a question of whether we have enough political will to admit the fact and to effectively defend ourselves. I think why the CCP might hate Abe the most is because he is, I think, one of the only or only few, or maybe he was the only one Western leaders who clearly declare a Taiwan emergency is a Japan emergency, or and then an emergency for U.S.-Japan alliance. Because up to now, the U.S. as a world leader has always been keeping its so-called ambiguous sort of policy. They didn't clearly say whether they will defend Taiwan or not. That gives the CCP a lot of room to move around and to head its way, or to, I think, at least give them some impression that they could, get their way ahead without serious consequences. So I think the more determination the West world show to the CCP that we are ready to defend Taiwan, and then less likely the CCP will risk, because they know if all the world rally behind Taiwan, they should think second about what they should be doing or should be not be doing. I think for the past several decades, the CCP has been working very hard to divide, international allies. They create chaos in Taiwan or in other countries, like they said they want to, influence public opinions in Australia. So to try to divide, European Europe, or try to sway Europe from U.S. So they try to undermine, all sorts of alliance relationships between other countries, so that it can, beat them one by one. But if all these countries get united together, the CCP would have great trouble. So I think that's why the CCP would want very much to remove anyone who is in their way, especially to remove the key figures who can unite the world together to fight back or to push back against the CCP's aggregation. So first of all, I think it's high time to recognize or to call out CCP for what it is. Like Professor Yuan Hongbin said, it's a political mafia, it's an international terrorist organization and a criminal organization. That's, first of all, we should recognize it and call it for what it is. And secondly, we should abandon all our illusion towards CCP that it might become good and it might not risk this, or it might use its rational mentality to consider issues. So because the past history of, several decades of its own persecution or suppression of its own people already tell us what a demonic nature, evil nature the CCP has. If it could, killed millions of its own citizens to sell their organs to profit, how can we expect such an evil, demonic organization be any better to foreign, citizens, especially to Japanese, whom they always call Japanese 日本鬼子, Japanese ghosts or Japanese devils, or their enemies. So they will never ever, I think, hesitate to like some of the little pinks say, kill all Japanese invaders, flood Tokyo with blood. So I think the Western public, the public in the West, and as well as the government, should have a very clear understanding of how the CCP is thinking and how they look at things. That's why I spent so much time, translating the CCP's official threat against Taiwan, as well as the CCP's Little Pink celebration about states, because those all reveal the true nature and the true color of the CCP.
And for those who don't know, Abe's assassination was celebrated at nightclubs in China. There were restaurants in different locations offering discounts on pastries, celebrating his death. And for anyone to make any type of a statement like that, it has to be approved by the Chinese Communist Party to begin with. Abe was a very key person and probably the only prime minister, former prime minister and current politician that had brought all the allies as possibly looking at Article 9 as ensuring that there was a change made to it after this election. And unfortunately now he's no longer on stage to affect foreign policy. Jen, I know that you cannot read someone's mind, but looking at patterns of how Japan in the past has approached this issue when it comes to countering what the Chinese Communist Party has been able to do internally in Japan. As a friend of mine who's there, Jason Morgan, said they tried to colonize your mind. Do you believe that there's any possibility under the current prime minister, as the current government is structured and now will go through a rechange after the elections, that there might be any possibility that the issues that Abe had talked about, specifically with Article 9, will be addressed by the current government? Is there anything that you are seeing pattern-wise that tells us we might be in a position where Japan will finally be able to, throw off the shackle that was placed on them after World War II? And for those Japanese, and I've told them this, when the Americans put that Article 9 in position, we never thought that the Japanese were going to take it and make it a long-term part of their constitution. It was just supposed to be a short-term, objective to be met, to be able to get Japan to where it could be part of the international community. But again, go back to the question I just asked. Do you think that is there any possibilities, looking at patterns, that there might be a change now after Abe's assassination?
I think it's the possibility is increasing. If we look at the election result 2 days after Mr. Abe's assassination, I think that his death, for whatever reason or for whoever is behind it, really, I think maybe has awakened more Japanese public. That's why they give his party more support, so that I think now they have enough 2/3 votes to move forward to remove that Article 9. So anything could happen, and especially in recent days, in the just past few days, many American politicians or important figures also started to call out for CCP to say we need to adopt more stronger, tougher positions on the CCP, or some started talking about the virus issue again. So it seems to me that the tide is turning after reached the worst position, like Chinese idioms say, 否极泰来. So when things reach to the extreme point, it were going to be turned around. So it seemed to me there is a possibility that I think at least the Japanese public is, I think, waking up. According, I heard to a poll something like over maybe a very high percent, maybe a 90% of Japanese public now is having very bad, impression or not good perspective or views about the CCP. I think if that really happens, it's all because of the CCP's own doings in all these years. More and more people are really tired of the CCP's, gaship ways of, expanding their power and taking advantage of others and creating chaos in so many other countries. So I think maybe there is a time people will say enough is enough, and they will stand up and to really push back against the CCP. Yes, I am hopeful that things can change for the better. But of course, at the same time, the CCP has been working on all this influence or infiltration campaign, even developing, CCP secret members for so many years. And so what I really worried is because the CCP use big money and to corrupt many politicians and even include some media people. So people, the CCP, without people realizing or knowing it, it already changed the narrative or perspective of many things in Western countries or in Japan. And maybe people will think of things are naturally this way, but things are not naturally this way. It's just CCP's work underneath many things on many levels. So if we don't wake up to that kind of threat, that is a big worry.
Well, look, if anything to attest to the Japanese waking up is that, Prime Minister Abe's funeral was supposed to be a private funeral with family members, and we showed the video of, the Japanese people said, no, he was our prime minister, and gathered in droves to ensure that they paid their respect. Look, all we could do is put out the information for folks to digest, and for the proper authorities and the individuals who are at the table, the decision-making table, to use it for their benefit. When I met in Australia with the shadow minister, going back now years ago, in 2018, or I should say 2017, it's been so long now. We did tell them what the Chinese Communist Party is doing internally to Australia. Whether they took steps or not to address it, we do know that some things came out and discussions, specifically even the Australian government trying to counter. But CCP does have a lot of sway with his money. Unfortunately, it's not even their money. It's money that we give them to use to give back to us, basically launder it back to influence our decision makers. And I'm hoping that we finally realize that in the long run, everybody's going to lose in this fight. It's not going to be a simple fight. But it is what it is. We keep Prime Minister Abe's family in our prayers, and that's all we could do. And we have to move forward. Japan has to move forward, to be able to fulfill the legacy that Prime Minister Abe had tried to leave for it. And let's hope it leads to a stronger Japan that can at least be a staunch ally, not just part of the Quad, part of the I-5, but also be able to be a strong ally for us in Asia, that can stand with Taiwan if the United States, under the current administration, is not willing to, at least address it legally in words that we're willing to stand with Taiwan regardless. I know that weather conditions are going to get better for a possible China move into Taiwan if they want to do it by around October time. Until then, they might be setting the stage to ensure that they have an effect as much as possible. For our viewers, I do want everybody to know that Jennifer does a wonderful job. She is a very valuable advisor for us here too in the Near East. But follow her on the Inconvenient Truths by Jennifer Zeng, her YouTube channel, and it's absolutely amazing what she's able to produce and literally give on the free for our intelligence community to gather and be able to use for the benefit of us being able to ensure that we don't, walk into a war or stumble into one, and if anything, prepare for it prior to getting there. With that said, Jennifer, I do want to give you the last words. Your thoughts on Prime Minister Abe's legacy, and where do we go from here internally as far as Chinese Communist Party is concerned with what's happening there over the next few months?
I think it pretty much depends on maybe how desperate Xi Jinping is getting. That's why I also share a lot of information about what is happening in China right now. As far as I can see, the bubble of the real estate market as well as the financial and banking system could be bursting at any moment. At this time, this will be an unprecedented crisis. The CCP has never been encountered in the past. Initially, when there were any problem, if CCP issued some favorite policy, people were rushing the market and buying again, and it seems that policy can always, bring a change to the market. But this time, I think these things, all the elements have been putting together. Like I said in one of my tweets, a perfect storm is forming in China, both in the real estate market and the financial system. The bank runs have already been happening in many different cities, and given that 20% of the CCP's GDP and nearly 50% of the local government revenue comes from the real estate market, and 70% of the the public's wealth, family wealth, is tied to the real estate market. So if this market bursts, that would be a huge disastrous consequences. So if the CCP encounters, especially if the Xi Jinping encounters bigger troubles in its financial system, or if Xi Jinping encounters big challenge to his own power, especially whether he can really gain a third term on the 20th National CCP's Congress. So all these factors will maybe affect how the CCP wants to move forward against its, war preparation campaign against Taiwan. It could be several years later, or it could be very soon, or maybe sooner than many of us have realized or expected. So that's why I've encouraged everyone to follow closely what is happening in China now, because that will not only affect Chinese people, but also affect us outside of China, because the world is so, interconnected place. So that's why things happen in China do matter to everybody of us.
I much appreciate it, Jennifer, and they are tied together. That's why we covered so much on the show here. And with that said, I want to thank you again for coming on the show and being able to really, so simply lay out the actual link analysis using open source information as to where we are today. And let's see what happens. You know, the world failed when we allowed the Chinese Communist Party to live for almost 100 years. We shouldn't allow that to happen again going in the future. The sooner we could see it completely collapse or in the 21st century, the better for the entire world. With that said, I want to make sure we tell our audiences too, as you all know, if you like the type of programming we're running, we do have a 501c3. We are supporting the Syrian Christians of northern Iraq. And for those who want to know how far China influences things, guess what? They're teaching Mandarin Chinese to the Kurds of northern Iraq, who are the regional folks that are managing the everyday lives of the Christians of northern Iraq. So it does have influence. And also at the same time, this year we're also raising money to give to the South Sudanese mission. And for those who want to know how that even ties into China, China's sucking up 95% of everything that's coming out of South Sudan with the current corrupt government that they're tied into, which has caused all the refugees are in Kenya. So please donate if you can and help us out. And I want to thank especially Sim Production for the wonderful job that they have done to be able to bring wonderful guests like Jennifer here to have this serious discussion with us. Again, God bless you, keep you, and we'll see you again. For our listeners, there's New Paradigms. God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.